Welcome back to another episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through some of the top stories, including, well, I take that back. Normally there's a whole list, but today is just one because we're actually splitting this episode up. There will be a debate special that came out last night. I don't know what time because obviously I have to watch the entire debate and then produce it. But this one is going to be about the fall and decline of the American empire, an article from Counterpunch that I really wanted to address. We'll also end today with our Daily Delight, a story meant to leave you feeling positive and ready to take on the day. But before we get into any of that, let's jump to our dip, dive, and dodge game segment. Roll the intro here. All right, I think I got enough time. That beautiful intro, so well produced, is going to be coming in there at the very beginning. How this works is I'm going to have one policy position that a reporter asks me about, and I will play the reporter as well. And then I have to talk about the issue that I actually was told beforehand coming in to the media session to say, no, actually, we're going to talk about this while also including a little bit of self-promotion. So I will now assume my first role. Governor Smith, as the great governor of the state of Michigan, there have been many talking points that have recently come out from a national scale about electrifying the transit system within some of our major cities across the United States. As Miss Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris, soon to be president in the minds of many, has been pushing an electrification agenda across every single state within the United States of America. How do you see this program working out and benefiting the people of your state? And can you promise that it will be done in an affordable manner? Well, thank you so much, my friends from NBC, for the question here today. And I definitely do not veer too far away from the party at large, especially our presidential candidate, Vice President Harris. She is a great woman who has proposed many great policy objectives, whether it be the electrification of our transit system or it be child tax credits. That's why many of these different proposals I have taken on, and there's one specifically that I have absolutely targeted in on, and I agree with Kamala Harris full force, and it is our Affordable Tax Care Cooperative Network, which is a way to address some of these childcare costs that many new parents are facing, while also trying to make sure we do this on a local level. So we'll create a cooperative where people can pay in and actually receive services that are checked by the government state agencies, while also ensuring that it is at a low cost because there is a wide range of people participating and the cost is being distributed among them. And this is one of the things that I've talked about many times in my newsletter, The Future of Our City, a solution for an equitable tomorrow. These sort of solutions where we bring the community together in order to strengthen our city, our communities, and then our state at large, these are things that we have to address every single day, and that's what I'm doing, fighting for the people of my state, and that is where I will work most hand in hand with the future presidential nominee, Kamala Harris. Thank you for your question today. So you can kind of see how dip, dive, and dodge goes. Also, my governor voice is a little bit, maybe I could work on my accents, my voice acting a little bit. But you can see the premise is, hey, you get handed something and you gotta get away from it. Like, I really don't want to talk about the extra money that's going to have to go to this program that everybody may not like, but there is something I feel like is really politically pungent, and I'm going to use it in order to make sure that people know I care about them as a politician. And we see politicians do this all the time, and they are always self-promoting. So that was the fun part of that game show, in my opinion, and obviously having random ideas just thrown at you from ChatGPT, you kind of got to integrate them and see how you can spin it together very quickly. I'm sure there are some comms teams that are like, wow, he really fluffed that one up, but if you're part of a comms team, I don't know why you're listening to this podcast, unless you want to hear about the decline of the U.S. empire, and if you do, you came to the right place, because that is our article from Counterpunch today, and it's a very, honestly, it is an in-depth article while also being extremely superficial. And what I mean by that is, if you want a perspective that is locked in on the fact that America is failing while also not providing enough information to truly elucidate that fact, then this is the article that you want to come to. And that's why I want to point it out, because I think there are certain themes that I most definitely agree with, while also I think there are plenty of aspects where you could delve deeper into it. And also, looking at empires that have fallen in the past, historical comparison is something that is extremely, extremely effective when trying to outline the fall of the current empire. One of the great examples that I always point to, and this is a really, sophomore, maybe junior level college thing. You go into a certain class and you hear something and you instantly think it is true. And you think it is the whole story. And of course, I had British history in high school as well as modern British history in college. And I'm not going to pretend as though everything that I learned in that class is 100% fact, but the parallels between some of the cultural trends within Britain as it was falling as an empire and the United States, the over-leveraging of debt, the libertine attitude towards sexual desires, and the libertine attitude towards how we interact with one another on a social level, the lowering of the, Christian ethic within the population, the over-exporting of production of goods, the failing manufacturing within England, and then also large sums, and I don't know how to put this very, very nicely, large sums of money being spent overseas basically uselessly and trying to throw your weight around on the world stage and it not actually panning out for you. So in Britain, it would have been the Suez Canal crisis. In America, you could say it's Afghanistan. You could say it was Iraq. All these sort of things are emblematic, or at least parallels, that make me step back and say, maybe we are on a downward trajectory like Britain was in the 1950s. Maybe we're going to see a contraction of the economy like Britain has. Britain's standard of living nowadays, don't get me wrong, it is very high compared to other places in the world, but it is not as high as the United States. And at one point, it was far surpassing the United States. And obviously, it's a different time, different values of currency, but if we're to do a relative test, their standard of living in the early 1900s was better than the American people in the 1900s, or roughly equal, if not a little bit better off. And now ours is way, 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 way better. Our economy has continued to grow, though we have also become a heavy service economy like Britain has. So all of these historical parallels really bring an extra concern to my heart. And that's why this argument about the American empire falling resonates to some degree, even if I don't necessarily agree with all of the points. But let's go into what the author says. This first quote is from the second paragraph. Quote, "The U.S. empire, audaciously proclaimed by the Monroe Doctrine soon after two independence wars won against Britain, grew across the 19th and 20th centuries and peaked during the decades between 1945 and 2010. The rise of the U.S. empire overlapped with the decline of the British Empire, as I just highlighted here. Quote, the Soviet Union represented limited political and military challenges, but never any serious economic competition or threat." End quote. And I think this is another point that they bring up, which is true. And I think there is a undercurrent here that needs to be acknowledged, that the Soviet Union, while it did not necessarily provide an economic threat to the United States, and it provided a military threat, there's no doubt about that, but what the Soviet Union actually did for the United States, and what I have continually said was one of the big problems with the hegemonic moment, and I say problems, one of the things that it would definitely change or alter, in not necessarily in a positive way, coming out of the hegemonic moment of the 1990s and the early 2000s for the United States, is we no longer had a common enemy, and that means that we had no one to define ourselves against as the American people. Now, you could say that you don't necessarily need that as a nation, but I would say that if you're in a place where there is no longer a shared religious identity, if there is no longer a shared cultural identity, a shared economic identity. So in the case of religious identity, you're not all Hindus, you're not all Christian, you're not all Muslim. In form of social identity, if you're not all participating in the same social circles, if you don't all have common values, so let's say there's an entire country that everybody loves comic books, that's something that you all share, it's a touch point for everybody. Or on the final shared identity point, the economy, if you're not all the underdogs trying to outstrip another nation who is more economically powerful than you, which then again also goes to my last point about having someone as an external, not necessarily threat, but competitor, something to aspire to beat, then you do need, if all three of those things sort of fail, and you don't necessarily have those shared mores anymore, then you need an external opponent to define yourself against. So no longer was the conversation, oh, we're Americans because we're all Christian, we have this. No longer was it Americans because we all believe in traditional sexual mores and this. We're no longer Americans because we're the economic underdogs and we're fighting against Britain. No, now, with all those different defining points gone, you have to really step back and say, okay, what makes us American? Oh, we're not Soviet. And whether that be ideology, that's what we really pin to as the United States, we say we're capitalists rather than socialists, and that can be an underlining moral value as well. But I would say that actually stems out of the fact that, no, we're American and not the Soviets, and that was one point that we actually clung to find a shared identity, but that only stems from the fact that we had an external opponent to cast ourselves against. I wouldn't say that on an ideological scale, we would say, okay, hey, we're capitalists, they're socialist, and that's why we have to be against the Soviet Union. It was a little bit inverse, because we already had some socialist movements within the United States early into the 1930s and 1940s. The distillation of the anti-socialist movement really came through because we had that external opponent, which was the Soviet Union, and we had the government cracking down on those sort of ideas. And I've talked about this before, that we no longer have a shared opponent. That's what the hegemonic moment does not necessarily provide. And that's why when you see everybody in Washington going after China, it should raise some questions, because are we looking to the outside for an opponent in order to cloud some of our internal problems and just distract everybody with what we need to be looking at? Basically, it's a magician saying, hey, look here, don't look on the inside of the hat, look on the outside, or vice versa. Don't look on the outside of the hat where the trapdoor contraption can be seen, but look on the inside for the bunny. So, of course, that always brings a little bit of fear to me, but when it comes to cultural cohesion, having that outside threat is something that allows us to unite as a people. We are not Chinese. We are not Vietnamese. We are not Brazilian. We are not part of the BRICS alliance. We are Americans, and we are defending our capitalist values. We are defending our Christian values. We are defending the values of the West. We're defending just the right to be a sovereign America, whatever it may be, and people can really choose any of those categories. It can still fall underneath that larger umbrella category that is, we are America. And having an external threat allows you to distill that message much more cleanly. And that is why I feel the hegemonic moment. I've said it 3 times now. We're going to come back to it because 3 times makes you remember it. The hegemonic moment, while it was great for the United States being on top and setting the rules, it also gave us a false sense of security. This very often happens with empires as they have grown too large. They become comfortable. They sit on their laurels just a little bit. They're overextended. They're spending too much money in foreign wars and foreign places they don't necessarily need to. And then there's a rising power, and you run into Thucydides' trap. Do you actually attack that rising power? Do you economically chokehold them like we're trying to do with China? Do we set red lines in the sand in order to ward them off that only causes them to say or develop a narrative that they are being pushed down, oppressed by the stronger power, and then gives them motivation to stand up? This is a tried and true trend throughout empires. And the question is whether or not we will fall into this trap. Now, would I 100% define this as an empire? I think you could definitely make the argument. We have military bases all around the world. For a long time, we had territory all around the world. And honestly, just the landmass we have now could have been considered an empire in previous times as well. So, of course, we can go back and forth about that. But whether or not you consider us a proper empire, you can definitely designate us as a sovereign nation, just as many empires before us were, and you can definitely see the trends that lead to decline. And let's go to one last quote from this article before we move on to our daily delight, because I think that there is something that the author really highlights that is extremely important, but also can have a flip side to it. Quote, empire confers special advantages that translate into extraordinary profits for firms located in the country that dominates the empire. The 19th century was remarkable for its endless confrontations and struggles among empires competing for territory to dominate, and thus their industries' higher profits. Declines in any of one empire could enhance opportunities for competing empires. End quote. This is something that we readily ignore within the United States, which is so think about Great Britain. Okay, Great Britain for a long time had a lot of the stronger industries, and also it made sense for a lot of companies to open up within Great Britain because everybody was basically trading in pounds sterling. So there was a natural home field advantage. If you were to operate in a different country, almost everybody's going to at least have some pound sterling as reserve currency, if it not on a local level and business level, at least on the government level. So then the citizens and the companies of that country could go to the national bank and say, hey, could we actually get this transfer to pound sterling? We're doing some trade deals with the British company, so on and so forth. And we have benefited from that here in the United States as well. We have benefited with everybody using the United States dollar as a reserve currency. But if things begin to shift, and let's be clear, a lot of people argue that it is too entangled to undo. I don't necessarily know if that argument is 100% valid. I have heard, like I said, many people say it, and I have heard the arguments for it. And I understand, especially nowadays, that most countries are propped up. And I say propped up. Most countries' trade is propped up by using USD. But slowly, if the environment begins to change and there is a drastic shift, whether it be because of a war or it's because of something the U.S. does, like weaponizing the fact that people have their dollars as a reserve currency, and they freeze some of their assets or they kick them off of the SWIFT network, then you're actually encouraging competition to bloom outside of the U.S.-dominated economic system, and you leave room for an opportunity for people to develop something new and something different that can compete with it, that could be exploited by a different country such as China, who is doing partnerships with Russia, or India. And we have to make sure that we do not become the country that is falling so rapidly that firms need to escape in order to survive. Because when that starts happening, that actually accelerates the downward curve of our fall. Because if companies do not see us being stable, they do not see the market continue to grow, they do not see the US dollar as a guarantor of good trade relations, and I'm not saying it's a guarantor of good trade relations right now. You have to still be good at your job in order to actually have a successful firm internationally. But if you can't rely on those inherent benefits that come with being based within the United States, then they will actively leave. And this is something else where we see the debt rating for the United States being lowered. It leads to shocks within the economy. And when I say the economy, I mean the false aspirations of the economy, or the false measure of the economy that is the stock market. And firms are going to continue to wonder, is this the place I want to set up my business? The ones that have been here forever, your GMs, your Fords, even some of the tech companies probably aren't going to leave right now. But when it comes to future startups, are they going to look at India as a good place to do it? Is there low regulation there? Is there low interference from the government? Are they going to be able to do their startups there without much trouble? These are questions we have to ask, and the fact that they are being asked, not just within the United States, but on an international scale, speaks to the fact that no longer is the hegemonic moment going to be, how should I say, unanimous. Not everybody's going to say, oh yeah, U.S. is the only place to do this, U.S. is the best place to do these sort of things. We still are now, but there are lots of people paving the pathways to a non-U.S. dominated world. And we have to always be vigilant about it. And if the author had made these arguments, rather than just saying, oh, that we've overstretched ourselves, that at the end of the day, we're not promoting democracy, and there's a few other points in here that kind of really make me happy with the historical parallels going towards the bottom half. They talk about it a little bit, but they don't spend enough time on it. It feels superficial while also outlining just the basics of it. And let's be clear, I understand that my analysis is most definitely superficial as well, because am I going to spend an hour and a half analyzing why the U.S. empire is falling apart? No, I'm not. But thank you for joining me for at least this superficial analysis of an article and my weird opinions on the fall of the American empire. If you want to check out, no, I jumped the gun there because we still have to talk about our daily delight. This one comes from The Focus. Dog and bunny play together in an adorable video that proves anyone can be friends. And when I saw this thing, I was like, dang, this bunny, like normally dogs have a lot of energy. This bunny has a lot of energy, and I honestly don't know how he does it. If you want to check out this video from the Daily Delight, or you want to read the article from today, the links will be in the description below that like and subscribe button. Also down there, you can find the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Cast, Podvine, as well as the Twitter handle @YourDailyFlip, where I post a Twitter tirade every Tuesday and Thursday. And also on Tuesday and Thursday, if you come back here, the RSS feed, you will have 6 and 6, which is world news. 6 stories from around the world in 6 minutes or less. So with that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe. Don't die.